Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Whether you're watching with our friends over at Torah Anytime or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, as always, we're excited to have you along, especially for this special episode. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and comment, and is there something else? Share. Share. I'll never get this down. We have a sponsor for this episode. It is sponsored by Ruth Briska in honor of Shifi and Shimon's 6th anniversary. May we celebrate many more simchas together. Love from your mommy, official chairman of the Milwaukee branch of the Rabbi Orlofsky fan club. All right. Yeah, all right. I have to make it back out there to Milwaukee. It's Milwaukee. It reminds me a little bit of when I went to yeshiva in Rochester, where we said there were 2 seasons. There was winter and July. So, Milwaukee's a little bit on the chilly side for me. But I can always go to Miami now. I understand it's delightful this time of year. Anyway, I'll give the briefest of introduction to this very special episode because for those of you who remember when Nixon was president, he was brought down by the Watergate scandal. Whether he deserved to or not is something that revisionists have been discussing, whether it was an overreaction. But it was basically revealed by 2 reporters of the Washington Post, Woodward and Bernstein. It was made into a movie, All the President's Men, with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, if I recall correctly. In any event, the entire premise was that they had someone inside of the administration who was leaking information, who they referred to as Deepthroat. And it was decades later that we found out who it actually was who was revealing the information. So those of you who are longtime aficionados, and I know there are a lot of them in the Rabbi Orlofsky community who have listened to everything that I have ever said, and therefore will no doubt be part of the prosecution's case against me when the time comes, knows that every now and then I make reference to my Talmud Chacham friends who I go to when I'm stuck and check out whether or not what I'm saying has any veracity to it or not. So I'm going to reveal one of my deep throat sources today. I've tried to keep him on the QT, my Rabbi Rabbi Rudman, who we go back to 1977.
Elul. Tafshin Lamed Zayin.
Yeah, was it Kedushin?
Yeah, it was.
Chavetz Chaim guys tell time by Masechtas. Anyway, it was Kedushin, 1977, and my favorite. One of my favorite Rabbi Rudman quotes was when I said to him, is there a makor for what I'm saying? And he said, no. I said, can I say it? And he said, you could say anything. And that has been the principle upon which I have made my entire career. And so, Rabbi Rudman, what a privilege it is to welcome you to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
Such a privilege to be here in the Orlofsky home. Not the first time. We've been here for many simchas and other events, but
Hashem,
now to be here like this is, is an opportunity.
As the show goes on, I'm slowly running out of people I have any relationship with. So who could say, yeah, I knew you, it's like, so people come on and they're like, who are you? So let's tell people a little bit about you. You grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And you...
and it's something very important.
Yeah.
Who was my cousin?
Go ahead.
My cousin was Rabbi Yaakov Whale, Rabbi Jacob Whale.
That was the man who was Makayev me. The only reason that I would guess by extension, my whole family is from today. Rabbi Findel, who started Hebrew Academy in Nassau County, has ultimate responsibility, but Rabbi Whale was the one who, mamish, came after me with forethought and malice. And dragged me in. And after I became from, he would tell me from time to time, Orlofsky, you're going to get me into Olam Haba. And I would say, Rebbe, we're both in a lot of trouble. If that's true.
I still remember the hesped you gave for him.
Yeah.
That is.
It was It was special.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I grew up in Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yeah. And you went to, the finest schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And PS 183. No. Mir Yeshiva High School.
Right.
But actually, you mentioned Milwaukee. The Yeshiva in Milwaukee, when it started in Milwaukee, Rabbi Rafi Waxman, Zechariah Levracha,
Yeah.
was a cousin of mine, and he sort of brought me into the Chavetz Chaim world, especially since we were always
That's
close.
how you got into Chavetz Chaim.
Because we were close to the Rav Moshe Chait, Zechariah Levracha,
Right.
through Far Rockaway. So then when I came to Eretz Yisrael, I came to Chavetz Chaim, and that's where our paths crossed.
That's right. That's where your life came to an abrupt halt. Now, I found out, Agav, that your father was the president of the Orthodox
Association of Orthodox Jewish Scientists.
Right. What kind of scientist was he?
He was actually a chemist. He was a crystallographer, as opposed to one of my teachers once who didn't really understand what that was and called him a crystallogist. He got a little bit upset about that. But he was a chemist.
Yeah, I found this out because over the years I have made vain attempts to try to, beat out Rabbi Rudman at something. I have never succeeded. But I remember we were learning Never Chaim, and he was comparing Naran to a glass blower. Now, I had, as a kid, gone to a revolutionary era village, and I watched them make glass. I said, "Have you ever seen them make glass?" And he goes, "Yeah, my father used to make his own test tubes." I was like, okay, I quit. So, and your mother was in Torah College.
She was a librarian in Torah College.
Right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, my father dropped out of school after 9th grade to go to work to support his family during the Depression. So, I'm always amazed at people who grew up in relatively normal surroundings, And then you were in Chavetz Chaim, and at some point you developed a relationship with Rav Moshe Shapiro. How did that happen?
Actually, how did it happen? It was in Tufshin Memvav, 1986.
Wow.
Moshe Feinstein,
that was before everyone knew who he was.
Not so much. People knew. He was already a Rosh Yeshiva in Mishkan Torah,
right.
What was known as Splitry. And for those who know Yeshiva history. And Rav Moshe Chait, who was very close to Rav Moshe Feinstein, and also Yaakov Kaminetsky, it was right when they were both nifter. And he gave a shir. Rav Moshe Chait didn't so much give a shir. He gave a hesped about his relationship with them and what he had learned from them. He had a very close relationship with Rav Moshe Feinstein, and I sat down to learn the sugya.
Rav Moshe had a relationship with Rav Moshe Feinstein?
Yeah, we're in the early 1960s when the Aguda joined forces with the church in order to get funding for parochial schools. They needed someone who would be in charge of the negotiations and who could make the Torah decisions. How much can we work with the church or not? And for some reason, I don't know exactly how, Rabbi Chait ended up being the person. He said, I can't make such decisions. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, as the head from the Torah Mussar, said, my door is open. Whenever you need, you can come in.
But Rav Moshe Shapiro didn't have a relationship with
Rav Moshe Shapiro knew Rav Moshe Feinstein. He's told stories about meeting Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he didn't have a relationship.
No.
But when Rav Moshe and Rabbi Yaakov were both...
Rav Moshe Chait did.
Rav Moshe Chait. I get mixed up with my Rav Moshe.
This is a tough one when we say Rav Moshe. Yes. Moshe Chait, Moshe Shapiro,
usually
Rav Moshe
Moshe is Rav Chait. But what's interesting is my kids remember when either of them would call the house, they would say, it's Moshe.
Really?
Yeah. One of my kids one time called my house for whatever reason, and one of my kids came holding the phone like it was like, the Aron Kodesh, Abba, he said it's Moshe Shapiro, but it's Moshe Shapiro on the phone, but he had spoken about he'd spoken about the sugya of Misas Tzaddik and Mechaper, and I sat down to learn it, and I learned the sugya as well as I could at that time. I learned the Marsha, and I looked at the Maral, whatever, a little bit of Maral. We knew at that time there wasn't any Maral with any kind of footnotes. Right. There were barely Marals. And I had reached a certain dead end. And I mentioned to someone in Shul that I was learning the sugya. He said, there's this Rabbi, Rav Moshe Shapiro, who gives a shir every Thursday night in Or Sameach. At the time, it was not what it was. Right. Later on, when there were hundreds of people would come. And he just spoke about it. And to show you how long ago this was, he brought me a cassette tape. Mm-hmm. And for those who know, what do cassette tapes and pencils have in common?
Yeah, nobody uses them anymore.
Well, no, you know what they have in common. What do cassette tapes and pencils have in common?
Yeah.
When the tape would get mixed up, you'd have to put a pencil thing, right? Come on, you have to be a certain age to know that, right? So I was listening to this.
Somebody pointed out that when you sell somebody, you sound like a broken record. They have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. So he gave me the tape, and I tried listening to it. It wasn't of the audio technology, the audio that we have nowadays that we're doing like right now, and I could barely hear it. Okay, I tried. I heard as much as I could, but I really didn't get it. A few days later, there was a wedding of a student of my wife who taught at the time was teaching in Sharfman's, and we were waiting for the Tzaddik edition, and randomly, because Baruch Hu doesn't run the world randomly, someone said, "Oh, you see that rabbi waiting there for the Tzaddik edition also? His name is Rosh Shapiro. He's a big Talmud Chacham." I said, "Oh," and I walked over to him, and I said, "Harav," in Hebrew, Shamati et shiur shel Harav al sugya shel misas tzadikim mechaper. Vilo zaya kaletet. It was a cassette, and I didn't really get to the end of it, and couldn't really understand it. Would the Rav tell me over what the end of the shiur was? Now, for those who know Rabbi Shapiro, I'm sure Rabbi Orlofsky has told many stories about him over the past years. Usually, it would be hard to imagine what would happen at that point. And for some reason, I had a lot of siyata d'shmaya, and he said, "Come, we're waiting anyways for the Tzaddik Kedushin." And it was in the parking lot of Moshav Ora. I still remember this, when there was a wedding hall in Moshav Ora. It was a parking lot. He walked in the parking lot. He didn't say over the shiur to me. He said, "What did you get to?" And I told him as far as I got. And he said, "So then we added," and he told me the end of the shiur. That was the end of what past where I had gotten. And I walked away from there. I said to myself, "Wow, I got to listen to this Rav." At the same time, one of the reasons why I did make this connection with him is there was the Rosh Yeshivat HaKotel, Harav Hadari Zichrono Livracha, who actually had been Rabbi Shapiro's roommate in Hebron. I one time mentioned him to Rabbi Shapiro, and he said, he told me his name before Hadari, or something like Ederman or something. I don't remember exactly, but it was a different name. He said, "Yeah, we were roommates in Hebron," and someone had introduced me to his shiurim, and I had started learning Reb Tzadok. In fact, I actually one time tried learning a piece of Reb Tzadok with Rabbi Moshe Shait from Chavetz Chaim, Zichrono Livracha. And for those who know anything about Chavetz Chaim, it didn't go very well. No, but it was, he said to me, "If this works for you, that's good. But I have what I have." They
won't learn Alei Shor. It's not our Mahalach. They won't learn Michtam Eliyahu. It's not our Mahalach.
So,
they have a very
good
specific approach to Mussar, that there is their Mussar from Slobodka, and there is no Chassidischkeit in it.
Yeah. And someone had introduced me to Reb Tzadok through Rav Hadari, and I had already been reading Reb Tzadok. So I started going to hear Reb Moshe when I could on Thursday nights. And then...
So that brought you... this makes you, especially in the Chavetz Chaim world, this makes you really... I'm trying to think of a different word for rebel. This makes you...
outlier.
Much more creative.
Outlier, I think is the word you're looking for.
Outlier.
Yeah, outlier, right?
Because, I think really Rav Dessler was the one who tried to take, Mussar and tie it together with Chassidus.
So there's
Rav Hutner did it, but he was after him.
A little slightly later. He was slightly younger. Rav Hutner was slightly younger than Rav Dessler.
I asked Rav Moshe once about Rav Dessler. So he says, I said, where'd he get his mahalach from? He goes, he made it up. He says he took Kabbalah, he took Mussar, he took Kabbalah, he took Hasidus, he took this, mixed it all together and called it Mussar.
So
he made it up. So
you've heard the story about with him and Rav Chatzkel Levenstein.
Who?
That with Dessler.
No.
When Rav Moshe Shapiro Zatzal was the Heisbacher, he was after Rav Dessler's Rebbetzin of Nifter. Rav Moshe lived in his house. He must have been about 14 or 15 at the time, and he was already learning in Panovich. And Rav Chatzkel Levenstein came to visit Rav Dessler. And on the way back from davening, they were both still wearing their talis and tefillin. Rav Chatzkel who was a whole different approach, was speaking very strongly to Rav Dessler about what is this new thing that you created? What did you create over here? This isn't what we learned in Kelm.
He was definitely reactionary, Rav Chatzkel.
Yeah. And there was a hanhaga in Kelm that when you listen, when someone gave you Mussar or someone questioned you, you held your hands in a particular way, you held your head down and you listened quietly and you waited. And when the person finished, you waited another beat and you said, "Can I speak now?" And Rav Chatzkel went on and on as they were walking back from the yeshiva in Panovich to Rav Dessler's home, and Rav Moshe was walking behind them. And when Rav Chatzkel finished, Rav Dessler waited that beat and said, "Can I speak?" And Rav Chatzkel said yes. And Rav Dessler said, "Anyone who thinks you can give Mussar after the war, like before the war, thinks the world after the war is like the difference is like the world before the Mabul and after the Mabul." That was his response.
There's no question that Rav Chatzkel was definitely a throwback.
Yeah, when Rav Chatzkel came to Panovich, he basically uprooted Rav Dessler.
Yeah.
You know,
tried to remove all that.
Remove that. Rav Chaim Friedlander went into Tivot. He left the yeshiva for a little while even though he still calls Rav Chatzkel Rabbi Rav Chatzkel Dessler, Rav Chatzkel Levenstein, but he had to leave for a little while.
That was the story when Rav Moshe went to see Rav Shach.
Yeah.
You know, he was criticizing that he was doing Rav Dessler's Mahala. So he says, "You and I heard the shmuzim from the Mashgiach here in Panovich." He goes, "Me, a Dessler hazeh? Feh." That's the way I heard the story.
The way I heard it, Rav Shach said in Yiddish, "Du meinst Dessler?"
Yeah.
And he made some kind of sound. I don't know if it would be... but the Chazon Ish used to come here, Rav Dessler.
Really?
Yeah. Chazon Ish would come to hear Rav Dessler. And in our yeshiva, in Chavetz Chaim, where we both grew up, the Rosh Yeshiva, one time sent a few Talmidim to ask Rav Hutner, "Where did this come from? It's it's not what my father learned with you by the altar."
Yeah.
And Rav Hutner's basically answer was, "I'm doing what I want." But but it's a different.
So here you're in Chavetz Chaim and you're doing Reb Tzaddik. At some point you got into the Maharal.
To some degree,
you know. Mm-hmm. At some point you got into the Sfas Emes because you put out, footnotes on the Sfas Emes.
Yeah.
Now that's Chassidus 101. There's no Reb Tzaddik. He's maybe on the edge over there of the yeshiva world. But
Reb Tzaddik was born a Litvak. I always say I always compare myself, but I wanted to write that I'm like Reb Tzaddik. I started a Litvak and then I became a Chassid.
So you consider yourself Chassidish now?
No.
Okay, so let's clarify that.
I wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, though.
Do you?
My mother was a Chassidish, and my mother came from Shortcut Chassidim, so I do have a certain connection to Chassidus.
You have a Tishbakisha?
No, I don't have a Tishbakisha, no. Yeah.
Anyway, I have one, but it's called a bathrobe, so it's not exactly the same thing. But anyway, so you mamish expanded out because, I remember a number of times the Rav Henoch had a question and answer, and people asked him, "Has the Rosh Yeshiva ever finished Shas?" And he would never answer the question.
Yeah.
You were there once, right? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't answer the question. So Chavetz Chaim has a much more narrow, I think they would say focused approach when they look at something. And Reb Moshe has a global approach, Mm-hmm. And I remember you said to me once something very interesting. I remember most of what you say. You said, I know other people who know everything, but I never met anyone who has a mahalach in everything. Like you could ask Rav Moshe anywhere, and he's thought about it, and has a mahalach to it.
It's not just that. I one time mentioned to someone that Rav Moshe used to have a shiur Motzei Shabbos in his house years ago, 40, when he was much younger, where with a group of close Talmidim, where Isha will come and ask him a question about whatever it would be.
Yeah.
What they were learning in Gemara, whatever it would be. This is mentioned actually in one of a famous English book that a lot of people read. Rav Moshe would then think for a second and then give a shiur that would encompass all of them.
Right.
I mentioned this to someone from a different generation who learned in yeshivas before the world of Hasidus became so popular. And his response was, that's like a trick. And I didn't respond because the person was older than
That's
me.
what Ray Bowman said once.
But-
he says it's smoke and mirrors. That's it. Was his expression.
My thought
And he's a
was,
Chassidish.
and he's a Chassidish, yeah. And my thought is different. You know, if you go to a doctor, I just actually had this. You know, do we go talk about our medical conditions?
You can
Baruch
talk about
Hashem.
anything you want.
So
There's no filter.
there's no filter. Okay, so
This is not a
there
Kamala
are-
Harris interview. We are not going to edit this.
So I have a certain medical condition, epilepsy, whatever. That's a whole story in and of itself. And for a different medical condition, I started taking a different medication, and it threw my epilepsy totally off. And I wrote to my doctors, my epilepsy specialist, and they said, oh, this interacts with that, and therefore you're having this reaction, so stop taking that medication.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, imagine you go to a doctor, a guy goes to medical school. He wants to become an orthopedic surgeon. So he never studies spleen and liver.
Right.
Would you really want to go to him? Of course, in the end, the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone, right? So, and that's lahavdil, the Torah, which has Ramache Varam Shasagidim. The Torah has, that is the structure of the human body. Our mitzvahs are connected to the human body. The whole thing does join together. It's not smoke and mirrors. I mean, Romans, you know, kodem komo munach. I understand sometimes people do it in a way that's smoke and mirrors, but someone who really knows the Torah understands how it really is one complete body.
Right.
And you can bring a Mishnah Melech in Alos
I
as
do
a
smoke
proof
and
on a
mirrors.
Rizal HaKadosh.
I definitely do smoke and mirrors.
Okay.
Because like my kids did this thing where they wrote down 3 random things on a piece of paper, like different stacks of paper, and you take 3 of them, you have to speak about it for 2 minutes. You know, they played a game. I had no problem. It was all smoke and mirrors.
But I'm saying the way Moshe grasped the Torah, it wasn't just that he had a mahalach and everything. It was one mahalach because to him the Torah was one complete unit. It was one human body. It was Ramache Varam V'Shasagidim that all joined together. And that was the way he viewed the Torah. And listening and being in the presence of someone like that and hearing him speak like that was just eye-opening, you know, eye-opening, mind-opening.
So you have a Chavetz Chaim Mahalach, and now you're learning Sfas Emes, you're learning Reb Tzaddik, you're learning all these things. Is there a contradiction?
Yeah, I want to actually ask Ramesh Shapiro that question. I said, you learned in Slobodka,
Right.
you know, you learned in Chevron, and now there's this whole other part.
Right.
And he said to me, what's the difference? And so he also said to me, if you don't have the foundation of Mussar, person who's, I mean, again, I'm not talking about learning Hasidus and people in different Mahalchim and Hasidim themselves, but if a person doesn't have the foundation of Mussar, of Yirah Shamayim, of what the standard things that are learned in Mussar, which can be learned through Hasidus as far also. But if a person doesn't have that foundation, the rest of it, you are just building on some level smoke and mirrors on top of that. There are things a person does need to learn and does need to gain from within having, you know, ben adam l'chavero, ben adam l'makom, on a basic way before you start getting off and flying off into other places where it's easy to be very theoretical, but you have to then make it practical. There are Hasidic yeshivas. I just saw a beautiful pamphlet for a Hasidic yeshiva that started here in Harnof, but it's built in a way which is building the Bachrim, including that also. They may not call it Mussar, but they're including that also within what they do. So I'm not saying it's that.
It's interesting. A chassid who went on to become a dayan, so when he was learning, he said to me, he says, for the neshama, for your ruchnius, you have to go to a Hasidic yeshiva. But for learning, you got to go to a Litvish yeshiva. That's the way that he put it. But so you got into, so did you ever finish the Sfas Emes? Like, I know you were putting out contrastum on different subjects and writing, footnotes on them, etc.
I did on the Yom Tovim, on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot.
Yeah.
I did on Chanukah and Purim. I did a few small ones that I did for some of my children's weddings. I published them. I have Pesach and Shavuos sitting on my computer. I'm actually restarting now the one on Tefillin. I'm going to write, it's actually probably going to be half in English, half in Hebrew, meaning an English overview and then in the back a Hebrew actual Sefer. I'm thinking of doing that on Tefillin. I actually was told to do that by a few different people. The Tefillin Shorosh as a I don't want to use the word skula, but if you have a neurological issue, you should write something on Tefillin Shel Rosh.
Wow.
And my wife has been after me for a number of years that you really have to do this. You're familiar with wives being after you to do things?
Nope.
No? Okay, good. Okay.
No, because I lost my hearing at some point. Anyway. But
she sends me emails to remind me.
That's interesting. Then she says to me, how come you never check your phone? So I'm sure there must be some emails piled up. But I would be neglectful if I didn't mention that you have a email that you send out that's also a blog at this point.
Yeah.
Called
Torah Thoughts by Rabbi Rudman.
Torah Thoughts, right?
But
and if somebody wanted to access that,
just search Zave Rudman and look for my WordPress blog, and you can find it.
Okay.
And through that, you can either sign up for the blog, you can sign up for the emails. It's all accessible there.
And I will give just one shout out, and that is that I know you did a lot of work in Zmiris on Shabbos, and I have been after you to put that out as a Sefer, because I think that is, since your wife decided to guilt trip you about the Tefila Shorosh, I just wanted to point out that, after, Shmini Atzeres, when the terrible tragedy took place, there were those Gedolim who said it happened on Shabbos, so we have to machazek ourselves on Shabbos. So last year I did a whole series on Shabbos, and I would have loved to have had your Sefer on Zmiris to be able to say Pshat in the Zmiris, so we are waiting for that. But none of that is what we're here to talk about. Because Rav Tzaddik, and maybe just, because Rav Tzaddik is an interesting character, because as you mentioned, he came from the Litvisher world, and he is somehow, even the Litvisher world that doesn't learn Chasidus, and that's becoming smaller and smaller, the truth is,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once upon a time, Misnagdim and Hasidim were fighting in the streets, and there's all kinds of things. Today, somebody said to me, what's the difference between Litvish and Hasidish? I said, Litvish learns, and they sing. I said, Hasidim sing and they learn. So, reminds me of Steve Allen's definition, the difference between capitalism and communism. He says, in capitalism, man oppresses man, and in communism, it's the other way around. So, so it's grown much closer. But even when there was, more of that tension, Rabbi Tzaddik was considered acceptable.
Rav Tzaddik also was a fascinating person. He was born into a Litvisher family, descendants of the Talmidim of Vilna Gaon.
Lublin, right?
That's where he ended. He ended in Lublin. He was born somewhere in Lita.
Oh, okay.
And he was a genius as a child. And the tragedy happened. I don't want to go into the details. And he traveled around Europe meeting different Gedolim. And among them, he met the Yishbitzer. And when he met the Yishbitzer, he was captivated by the Yishbitzer and became a Talmud of the Yishbitzer. And in that school of thought of Pshischa, which is the more Lumdische type of Chasidus, and that's where he found his home. I know they say his family set shiv on him. They didn't set shiv on him. That's I don't know whether that's that. I don't know whether there's any truth one way or the other. But and then he sat and learned there. Just to mention where we're recording this, it's Ches Tishrei, right? So Matzah Yom Kippur, there's a minute to start building your sukkah. So Tzaddik was very makbid on that minhag. You know how he would start building a sukkah Matzah Yom Kippur? He would sit down and learn Masechah Sukkah from beginning to end that night. That was how you start building your sukkah.
Right.
So that was Rav Tzaddik, and we have from him numerous Sfarim. I mean, the original way it was printed was 11 volumes. Now, as Sfarim have this habit of multiplying and expanding, into larger and larger, space.
What's his most famous work?
His most famous work is probably Tzidkas Tzaddik. But there's also the Pri Tzaddik. Pri Tzaddik actually wasn't what he wrote. It's what his Talmud Chasidim wrote afterwards from what he would say at the Shabbos Tish. And that's a lot
of Chasidish Sfarim.
Yeah.
The Shem Shmuel, the Sfas Emes, they all go by Shabbosim.
They go Shabbosim because they spoke on Shabbos. That's when they spoke. I mean, look in the Litvish yeshivas. You won't find shmuzim on Parshas Akev because there was no yeshiva Akev. So there's no shmuz from the altar on Akev.
Right.
Because there was no yeshiva then. If you look at that, you look at it in the same sort of parallel way. Chassidim have on all of them because they had Tish every Shabbos.
Sure.
So, but the Pri Tzaddik, actually, mostly Pri Tzaddik he didn't write, was written down, and there are parts which they have from his Ksav Yad. But the Pri Tzaddik is also very famous because it's on the Parsha, and people take it out on Shabbos and look at it. But also, once again, it's not the kind of thing you just take out on Shabbos and look at, meaning it's something, each piece is a page, 2 pages, that can quote, and on a page he can quote 30, 40, 50 references from Tanach to Shas to Chazal to Zayar to the Arizal HaKadosh to the
all his
other
Sfarim are machshava, or does he have any?
He has Sfarim on halacha. There are Shas to choose from him. There's Sfarim on halacha. There's also, like many of the other people from his generation, there were thousands of pages of manuscripts that were lost.
Right.
Of all kinds of other writings that were lost in the in the Holocaust, and they're gone, destroyed, maybe hidden away somewhere. At some point they'll come back. Who knows? But
so there was one Sefer that you decided to use as the basis to put out this beautiful Sefer, which and Hashem remembered them, and this is based on which Sefer of Reb Tzaddik?
So one of the tragedies of Reb Tzaddik's life was that he never had children. And within all his different Sfarim, he wrote a Sefer called Poker HaKarim.
Right.
The one who remembers those who are barren. And he bases it on a Chazal. Yeah. Chazal says that there were 6 women who didn't have children. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, the mother of Shimshon, Chana, and Isha Shunamis. And then he said there's a 7th one, which is Klal Yisrael. Rani Akara lo Yolada. Like we say, Sos Tasis V'Sagel Akara. As we say that the Akara, the barren woman, should be rejoiced. We make that bracha at every single Shavah.
I have to say that none of those are really good examples because they all ended up having children.
So that's exactly the point. Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really, if you want to talk about childless people, those who go on to have children, it seems like a bad example.
And the answer is Poker HaKarim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu remembers, right? That's what we did on Rosh Hashanah. We began the Lenny, Hashem Pakadeh. Right. Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara says, right? Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that on Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana were nifkudu. They were remembered. So Reb Tzaddik's
here so everyone can see it.
Oh, thank you.
Right by the Rabbi Orlofsky sign.
Yeah. Okay. They'll think Rabbi Orlofsky wrote it.
I will. One of the things that I have done well throughout my career is take credit for things that other people have done. You know, every now and then you find someone who's an unav and they say, "I don't want to take credit." I said, "I'm more than happy to." Yeah.
So
now, why did this interest you?
Why
you can have a fine mishpacha.
Baruch Hashem.
You know,
there was someone in my family who did not have children so quickly, but the fact that this is actually, you just recently saw in a different podcast by a different well-known Jewish podcaster who said, as far as he knows, this is the only machshava sefer on fertility in the entire Jewish library.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? You
know, no one else wrote about it as a topic. And in my learning through Reb Tzaddik and trying to learn through different parts of Reb Tzaddik, I mean, one point, Rabbi Zatzal said to me, there isn't the difficult sugya Navi. I teach a lot of Navi. There isn't the difficult sugya Navi which Reb Tzaddik does not explain. So I started learning through the Sefer and writing down.
Where is he talking about Shimshon?
Shimshon has a whole Sefer. The whole simchas Tzaddik is about. Oh, sorry, Yisrael Kedoshim. The entire Yisrael Kedoshim is all about Shimshon.
That's a tough story.
Yeah. So he goes. Basically, Yisrael Kedoshim is about Shimshon, but within the Sefer also there's a section on Shimshon because Shimshon's mother gave birth to him, and we'll see how that's. We'll see in a moment. We'll see how that's connected. So he said, this person said, this is the only book of machshava on barrenness. It's not a book of stories. It's not a book of chizuk, so to speak, in emunah, which are important. It's not a book of skulos. It's a book where he analyzes what each woman had to do in order to break through that barrier. Meaning, Kodesh Baruch Hu said, the Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? There are 3 keys, right? Kodesh Baruch Hu said there are 3 keys. One is the key to giving birth. In addition, we know that the 3 things that are not totally in Zchus, they're totally b'mazel. The mazel of a person is b'nei chayim zoneh, right? So therefore, and the general way Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world is lo tohu bara l'shev yitzara. The world is created in order for people to have children. So why are these people not have children and then have children? So, and then he asks a second question, which is, well, why are there 6 of them in Tanach? Once Tanach teaches me something, I don't need to be taught it a second time.
Right.
So it must be that each one of these
is a chiddush.
Right. So what's the chiddush of each one? What was the chiddush of Sarah? What was the chiddush of Rivka? All the way through to the chiddush of the Isha Shunamis. And he wrote, it's actually in Hebrew, it's a pretty small sefer. It's 60, depending which edition. But again, it's about 60 pages. And just the idea fascinated me. And I sat down to learn it and try to think about it. Now, for those who studied Reb Tzaddik, Tzaddik's
you
not
have
really...
an advantage in that you've been teaching Nach for many years. So, you know, some of these stories...
I know that there's something called Yeshua, Shoftim,
right,
Shmuel,
you've heard of these things.
Yeah, I can even say them in order sometimes. Yeah.
You know that line from Moshe? Where
Which
he
one?
put a pasuk from Navi And he says, what do we learn from this? He goes, apparently that you have to wear stockings. That's what every pasuk.
I told you that story.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying.
When I first started teaching Navi, Rabbi Moshe said to me, "Aval taseli tova achat. Please do me one favor. Teach it what the Navi says. Not that every pasuk in Navi in the end is something that someone Mussar that someone needs to do."
Yeah, but he said in the shir once. He says, we don't really learn Navi. Girls learn Navi. So what is the pasuk coming to teach me? Wear stockings. He says that's what every pasuk in Navi comes to teach us. He says, but maybe there's something else here.
So yeah, well, my son actually calls Tanach the Torah or Hashalim.
Yeah.
Because side of the Gemara, the Gemara is the Torah, which brings the pasuk. So there's something l'shalim where all the psukim from the Gemara quotes are brought, right?
Right.
Where do we know a pasuk? Because we know the Gemara. From the Gemara, we know the pasuk.
Right.
Where do we know the Gemara? We know the Gemara from the
Taisvus. The Taisvus. The way the joke used to go, no, it's a Taisvus because you saw the Taisvus says no, but the Beis Lechem Yehuda brings it down. So
well, first the Tzaddik, and then the Beis Lechem Yehuda. Yeah, but
cheating for him. So anyway. Yeah, so now this is not a translation. This is an adaptation.
Right, because to translate Reb Tzadok would be, that doesn't make any sense. He's writing it in a...
This is the big problem I've had. I've been working on a modern translation of Mesilas Yesharim for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to do because I want to do it the way Aryeh Kaplan translated the Torah in the Living Torah, where you can read it like it's a book. And it's very hard because his Lashon is... I don't want to use the word convoluted, but it's because he's hiding so much Kabbalah in it. So he's saying in a few words a lot of very deep things that you have to try to put in. So Reb Tzaddik also doesn't write with that level of clarity that when they write over the shmuzin of Yitzchak Isaac Sher, for example, where you can just read it through like a novel. So you have to adapt it. So did you add in more stuff than Reb Tzaddik says?
I added in a lot of stuff from other places Reb Tzaddik said. I added in explanation beforehand, which obviously a person needs beforehand in order to understand it. There's actually a chapter at the beginning about just what the spheros are. Because he connects these 6 women, each one of them, to one of the 7 spheros. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach. What are these things? Chapter just to give a basic understanding of it.
Right.
Nothing Kabbalah, but just an understanding. I mean, we say it by, Ramesh would always say, it's printed in the Siddur and Spheros Omer, what Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yisod, Malchus are. So we can talk about it a little bit if it's already printed in the Siddur.
Right.
So a little
I heard him once say,
understanding.
he goes, it's a Ramban on Chumash, so it's okay, we can use it. Mm-hmm.
But the idea was to not just that, but also he goes sometimes. Obviously, he jumps from topic to topic. He'll talk about one of the women, and then jump to a different one, and then jump back.
Right.
So to basically,
that's what you do with the Sfas Emes, because in order to find what the Sfas Emes says, even on one parsha, you have to search through everything to be able to get it, because he
Well, every year he would go back to the same medrash and give another little piece, another little understanding, another little bit.
And then if you want to do it by topic, it's much harder because he jumps around from so many different topics. You don't know where he's going to be talking about something, So Reb Tzaddik is also mixing and matching the concepts over here.
So obviously this took what Reb Tzaddik said and brought it down a level, but brought it down a level that it can be it's readable. It's understandable. It's in each one. Each one of the women is in their own chapter, and each one, the main topics or the main subtopics are then explained with introductions beforehand, what they're relevant and how to understand them, and then connecting them back to what the specific issue was.
So, does this? I spoke years ago for an organization called A Time, which are people who are married a long time and have been childless. You know. And I remember I always get nervous when I have to speak to a particular audience that I don't want to be trite. In fact, there was one time I was writing a chinuch column in the Hamodia, and there were 2 other people writing too. And I got a lot of letters, talk about this, talk about that. And I said, there are 2 other people. Why don't you write to them? He says, because you talk about the real issues. Everybody else talks around without, addressing the elephant in the room, So I was going to speak for A Time. And I said, what do you want me to say? Because don't say it's a schus to be us. right? As everybody says, why was Rivka childless, says Rashi? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves the Tefilas of tzaddikim, and he wants you to daven, and he wants you to... Don't say that. Say it stinks being us. I said, okay. And I said, wow, this is terrible. You guys have no kids. This is a horrible thing.
So this is a whole different...
So what is this? Is this book to give chizik to people who don't have children? Or is it to give an understanding? Or to say, listen, as I guess from Tzaddik would have said, it is what it is. You know what I mean?
I mean,
none of this helped him. He didn't have any children.
Again, like I said, it's not a book of schoolos in that sense. And it's what I call it is a work of avoda. Meaning what Tzaddik did is he said, what was sorry menos avoda, what was roch, and he talks about it actually from the woman's perspective also. It's mostly from the perspective of the woman who doesn't have the child. What did sorry menos have to do?
Said, right?
Yeah, what did Sarah do? What did Rivka do? Rachel, right. So he talks about it from that side. He talks about it from that approach. And each one, he says what was lacking in the world that they brought into the world. Does that mean that each individual woman, each individual couple that don't yet have children, are going to tie into one of these, and that's going to be their avoda? That's what they're supposed to do. I don't know. We don't have Ruach HaKodesh. We don't have Vim. But in some way, he's explaining the gates that HaKadosh Baruch Hu opened for each of them are obviously, if they're in Tanach, they're gates for all of Klal Yisrael. Right. And even if a person, even just learning Torah, we know affects the way the world. So I'm not saying reading this book is going to, like you said, reading this book is not a skula. Right. But if a person wants to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, we learn through the Torah. So this is part of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, and this is how he created it and what was done as he created it. And this is an explanation of it. And it gives an understanding. He
didn't talk about himself.
He didn't talk about himself, not at all. No.
Right.
He doesn't mention himself.
And
no.
Does he discuss the men involved here?
There is a section on the men. He does have a section on the men. There's a separate area where he talks about the men. I put that in a separate chapter. Of course, it's a whole separate din. Especially he separates it out in various different ways.
It's an interesting situation, forgetting about the halachic implications. If you get married and it turns out that one of them has a problem, that they can't have children. So do you stay married? Forget about the halachic implications. The emotional implications of saying, if I divorce this person and marry somebody else, I'll have children. Do I decide to stay with this person and not have children or not?
Neither of us have had that nisayon, so it's...
I'm thinking specifically of Tzvi Kushelevsky, who apparently him and his wife could not have children. And then he got remarried, and at the age of 82, he finally had his first child. Yep. That's of biblical proportions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Luckily, he's from Rosh Hashiva, so the usual trope of how you're going to go outside and play ball with him is not going to be an issue, because he wouldn't play ball with him if he had him at 25 either.
But no, there's halachic issue about that also, aside from emotional issue.
Yeah, that's why the halachic issue I understand, because you can always say it's the Tosfos. You could toilet to this, you could toilet to that. It doesn't have to be because of this. Maybe it's because of that. But I'm saying today, when science can tell you can have children and you can't. So now, do we stick it out or not, and just hope for a miracle, or do we say, "Gee, I'm sorry, honey, but
Well, when it's a question like that, you can only answer when someone asks you that halacha l'mais, and you have siyata d'shmaya to answer such a question.
Yeah,
it's. There
was a story where this couple came to Rabbi Yaakov, and the doctor said they couldn't have any children. I said, could you give us a bracha? He says, what am I supposed to do? Anyway, they come back years later, and they have a child. So he says, what happened? He says, went to the stifler. He goes, that's different. What'd you expect? And he tells the story when the two of them were in the Russian army. You know the story? Yeah, with a target practice.
On Shabbos.
On Shabbos. So they did it with a shinoi.
Yeah.
And the idea is you have to keep shooting to get the bullseye, So each one of them is doing it with shinoi, and they're hitting, the building outside, and the stipler, put it over his shoulder and blindfolded and pulled with his left pinky, and hit the target and says, Shabbos Rabbi Sai. That was the story of Yaakov told,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So So is there chizuk in this book for the childless, or just explanations?
It's an understanding. There's chizuk, an understanding that the Torah deals with this. There isn't chizuk in the sense that there are other kinds of books of chizuk that people are mischazik. Wow, it worked for them, or this is how they dealt with it.
Right.
But it's an understanding that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that Hakol Toli B'Mazel Chutz Mi B'nei Chai U'Mezoneh, an understanding of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and what are the different ways by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu directs the world. So it's a Sefer of learning.
Why do some people not have children?
So I don't.
I mean, that's one of the three signs of kares.
So
I don't think we have Tzaddik was chayiv kares. I don't think we have Henach was chayiv kares.
Yeah. What it's, for example, actually something very fascinating, something from the Sefer. The Zohar Kodesh says something that people wouldn't realize. Have
children? There were famous people.
Great Gedolim.
Yeah.
Chazon Ish.
Had no children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rabbi Simcha Wasserman.
No, Simcha Wasserman.
Rabbi Simcha didn't have children. People go to him with chinuch questions. And someone one time said to him, how can you answer them? And he said, I was raised by a great father. That's how he said he was able to answer them. But for example, Chazal teach that the Zohar Kodesh says that contrary to what you might think, Sarah and Avram were not redeemed. Their gate wasn't opened by Tefila.
Right.
They didn't daven. It doesn't say anywhere in the Chumash that Sarah and Avram davened.
Right.
Even though there's a Chazal that says it, but the Zohar Kodesh says very clearly, and Tzaddik builds on that an entire binyan of how Torah changes the world, and how a person's chelik in Torah changes the world. Because when we learn Torah, we're dealing with the blueprint of the world, but the blueprint of the world that can actually change the world. And through that, once they were Megayer Giyurim, they created new neshamas that then opened the gateway by which they were then able themselves to change themselves to be able to have children. Or, for example, the Isha Shunamis, he talks about, she's the first person, she went to a tzaddik to daven for. But he explains why the Isha Shunamis was able to go to Elisha. She herself was already a tzaddikis, and it says her husband was a tzaddik. He brings proofs to that. And they went to Elisha, and what kind of tzaddik to go to?
I thought he told Elisha not to daven.
What?
Because Elisha says, I'm going to go and ask the king. Can I ask him for anything?
Yeah, so she said,
he says, no,
but
it's Rosh Hashanah. So I'd rather be...
Yeah, with everybody else.
Yeah.
But then Gehazi says, she doesn't have a son. And Elisha promises her one. Right? And then...
But she didn't seek him out for that.
Yeah, but then she goes back to him. And what it means she goes back to him and how the...
Says,
and also
why'd you give me a kid if the kid died?
Yeah, but then she explains the interplay between Elisha and Gehazi and Isha Shunamis. There's a whole interplay between the three of them.
It's explains a very strange story.
What happened over there, and why ultimately, though, there does exist a person who connects themselves to, even though he was Chassid, there's a person who connects themselves to the tzaddik on the level of Elisha. On that way, is able to open up a different gate that doesn't even so much require tefillah as just the tzaddik's tefillah is able to do it because you're connected to that gateway also.
Even without Chassidus, someone gave me the pshat many years ago. I don't remember who because I have a terrible memory. But my
name is Rabbi Rudman.
Listen, you know how to call 911. So anyway,
can I just tell a story for a second before you go on?
Yeah.
When you used to give the shir Motzei Shabbos,
yes.
And sometimes Motzei Shabbos you need a source right before the shir.
Yeah, because I was preparing right up until the last minute.
Yeah, exactly. So Motzei Shabbos, we'd finish Havdalah and the phone would ring. And my kids would all in unison say, oh, it's Rabbi Orlofsky calling.
Well, listen, desperate times. I was preparing right down to the wire because, when I would say my Parasha Shiurim, I didn't want to say what everybody said. So I would look for a question that nobody else really talks about. And as my wife said to me once, if nobody talks about it, maybe that should be a indication to you that you should pick something else to talk about because there's nothing there, I'll never forget one time when Rav Moshe was doing an Adaptation, he says, there's no Maharal, there's no Maharsha, there's no, he says, even a Boy Scout needs a compass and a box of matches. Matzpon ve'gafurim. It's such a great line. You're like, you need something to work with, and all the times I've done it, I've often gotten a yesod from you that I was able to then build the shir out of, but except once that I was mamish stuck. I have no answer to this day. I'll never forget. It was Parshas Miketz, and it was Shabbos Chanukah, and so I figured, what am I going to talk about? So I decided I would do a whole riff on Chanukah presents. And I would talk about the present that Yaakov gave the brothers to bring to Tzafnas Parneach, of course, Benotzim was Yosef. Pistachios. So one of the things, it says botanim, and Rashi says it's the only place where it appears, and it's pistachios. And I thought to myself, why are pistachios zimros ha'aretz? And I have no idea to this day. I never found an answer. I can't find anyone who talks about pistachios. So I don't know.
We'll work on it.
It's just a mystery. I'm telling you, I looked around and I can't find anyone who says, of course, you sing the praises of Eretz Yisrael about pistachios because... The only thing I can say is today, Israelis have gone crazy over pistachios. So they come out like pistachio ice cream and pistachio yogurt and pistachio this. So at some point, it must have finally clicked in that would be Moshe Mashiach. And now the pistachios are coming back to the Zimmer Zahar.
Maybe it's called Mashiach ben Yosef. I don't know, something like that,
I don't know what it is. It's green or it's green. I don't know. I can't figure it out. But so come out like that. But I remember hearing that the reason you go to a tzaddik when someone is sick to daven is because there's many considerations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes into account. Like the Gemara says, if you're supporting aniyim, even though you deserve to die, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will keep you alive in the schus of the aniyim. Right? Based on Shalmata won't, but Kadosh Baruch Hu will. He'll take those things into account. That's why Lot was saved, because eventually Rus would come from him and from that Mashiach. And so there were other considerations. So if a tzaddik says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this will upset me if the person dies. So now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, oh, really, you deserve to die. But for him, I'll keep you around. So there's a extra aspect to it. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, but Reb Tzaddik himself didn't get it, whatever the key was, he never found the key, So you start to say that. So why is it that some people are not zoicha to have children if it's not, a direct ownership? It's based on mazel.
It's not based on it's mazel. It's mazel. That's what it means. But la b'schus it doesn't depend on the schus. It depends on the mazel. And there's some people just in the same way. Why was I born? And I grew up to be 6 feet tall and someone else isn't. Because Baruch Hu gives each of us the parameters of our life and we live within that. But like Taisu says, we can't change the mazel. Even someone in Klai can change their mazel. So that does happen. Why, look, it's a pasuk in Navi, right? Well,
could be.
As it says, we said, but it's in the Haftarah.
If you're not sure, then just say Yeshayahu or Yechezkel, because no one knows what's in them.
Or Treyasa, yeah. Because no one even knows all the Treyasa.
That's because they don't go to Geula. Just read the streets.
Read the street signs. But it says, Kol Amar Hashem l'sarisim asher yishmu Shabbos Chanukah uvachu asher chafasti. Kosh Baruch Hu says to the sarisim. And Chazal say that's Chanani Mishal Bazariah, who didn't have children. But they kept my Shabbos, and that's why it's called Yad Vashem. I'll give them a Yad Vashem, I'll give them a monument that's greater than Banim Ubanos. And Tzaddik talks about that and explains what that means and why there are Sarisim. In the chapter about that, they do go through that. I do explain how he explains how that works. And there is also the fact that the person's Maisim Taivim, Elo told us no. And he talks about this, and it's not meant to be, I'm not writing it as an Nechama, I'm not writing it as Chizuk, I'm writing it as this is the structure of the Torah. We have a structure of the Torah, and Tzaddik goes through the whole Torah, this idea of Kol Torah Kula, and shows us the structure of how this works.
Right.
It's not a Sefer to sit down on Shabbos afternoon after the Cholent on the sofa and read.
Right.
It's a Sefer. It's meant to be learned, but it's a Sefer that has that.
Which is, I should point out, often deceptive, because people look at an English Sefer and they think it's an English book. And there are svarim that are written in English that have to be learned just like a sefer, whether it was written in Lashon HaKodesh or not.
Actually, one of my friends is pushing me to translate the adaptation now into Hebrew. It's like they take Reb Tzadok and now translate it back into Hebrew, but because it's written in an approachable way, it can be learned in a whole different way.
Yeah. When Menachem Nissel wrote his Rigshay Lev on the halachas of women's Tefila. So the same thing happened. Israeli said, we need this in Hebrew. So he translated it back into Hebrew. So it's funny that when you find Lahavdil, like there'll be a Broadway play that'll be made into a film, and then that film is made into a play of the film adaptation. So so it goes back and forth. So, so the the Gemara, you'll tell me where it is, I'm sure, where somebody loses a teenage girl or younger, and she never had any children. And they all say, how are we going to pay a shiva call? Like, what are we going to say? So one guy says, I'll say the nechama. He says, you see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu kept Lot alive because Rus was going to come out of him. So you could see that nothing was going to come out of your daughter, so you don't have to feel bad. So Shlomo Zalman says, what kind of a nechama is that? So he says, part of the pain of losing somebody who didn't have any children is the fact that we think what's going to happen. I had a neighbor in my old building 35 years ago who lost a little child, and she said, 2 years old, meningitis, and she said, I think the most painful thing is thinking of what her life would have been. Would she have gone to school? Would she have graduated? Would she have had a job? Would she have gotten married? Would she have children? And so thinking about all that. So he says, don't worry. If there was anything that was supposed to come out of them, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have kept them alive. So vice does whatever they were supposed to do in this world, they did. And you don't look at it from the point of view of what didn't they accomplish, what didn't they have. If they didn't have any children, then that wasn't their tafkid in this world, So Sarah Schneer, who didn't have any children, had thousands and thousands of children, right? Just not biological. Like you said, Ela told us Noach ish tzaddik. The Maisim Tovim are also called told us. When Reb Tzvi was a younger man in his 60s, so he said, my biggest chisaron is my biggest maila. Because I don't have a family to take care of, I could put all of my emphasis into building my yeshiva. Now I guess he's going to neglect the yeshiva a little bit. He's in his 80s and he's going to play with his kid, you know what I mean? And, go to Avos Ubanim.
He will. I'm sure he will.
Hashem, it's an amazing thing,
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. But
there was a woman in Bnei Brak, I don't know if you heard about this. She was 80 and she had a baby. It was an amazing story. What happened? She donated to Kupat Ha'ir, and by mistake, she pushed the button for Zeresh Kayama instead of Arichas Yamim. So you got to be careful. Kupat Ha'ir,
Yeah, power. It's lucky. You never know.
Stories.
But again, what the Sefer does is at least it shows that the Torah has a framework. The Torah has a structure.
Right.
And there's a structure for what you're in, and this is what it is. What the end result is, there's also, Tzaddik all discusses that too.
Right.
And the end actually is the Klal Yisrael, the Gemara with Ruria, where Roni Akara Lo Yolada. Klal Yisrael is also called an Akara. And we're looking forward to the barrenness of Klal Yisrael turning into Rina, right?
Right. Right.
Right. And he says the seventh Akara is Klal Yisrael itself. And that's Malchus. That's leading to the final.
So we are called Akara now because?
Yeah, because Klal Yisrael can't accomplish. We don't have a base in Mikdash. There's some mitzvahs we can't do.
Right.
There's so much of ourselves. We like the Chofetz Chaim says, we don't have a base in Mikdash. We don't have so many mitzvahs that we can't accomplish. So most of our body can't find its completion by fulfilling the mitzvahs it's supposed to be able to do.
Right. Okay, so the Rabbi Orlofsky show audience knows that we only recommend top quality things here. And in fact, we talked about Rabbi Greenwald's new book, and I got a lot of email from people who told me that they went out and bought it and were very glad that they did. So after everybody buys and Hashem remembered them, what's the next project we can expect from Rabbi Zave Rudman?
There's I'm
working on to the store looking for.
I'm working on two things right now.
What else you put out officially besides this?
I was an editor actually on the Torah Shalem, the last half of Yerodea from Hilchos Mikvos.
But your name's not on it.
It is. If you look in the Torah Shalem, yeah, my name's there.
Okay. All right. So if you want to buy a tour,
that's the standard tour that most people, whatever.
Most of my people go on tours. They don't actually learn them. But okay.
I put out 3 volumes in Hebrew on the Sfas Emes,
Right.
on the Yom Tovim. This is the first actual book in English. I'm now working on 2 projects simultaneously. I've been working on Reb Tzaddik on the months. In the Pri Tzaddik, Reb Tzaddik discusses what is the function of each month. There's a whole thing there in the Sefer Yetzirah, in the book of creation, an early Sefer, where he says each month has a part of the body and it's connected to a shevet and it's connected to all these things. Connected. Reb Tzaddik has a number of pieces at the beginning of each month. Part of it is very Kabbalistic and is ununderstandable. But there's a part that you can understand. What is the avodah of each month? What each month am I supposed to be doing?
So I'm going to throw in my 2 cents and say you should also throw in the Bnei Yissaschar.
Bnei Yissaschar does. I do
Who does
Bnei
that too?
Yissaschar. I do a little Bnei Yissaschar, and the Shem Shmuel talks about it also.
Right.
But
So
it's
you put
basically
that all
but
together.
it's basically built on Reb Tzaddik, because Reb Tzaddik talks a lot
Right.
more than there's a lot more than the
More
others.
than the Bnei
More than Bnei
Yissaschar.
Yissaschar, yeah.
Wow.
More than Bnei Yissaschar. And
Which Sefer is it?
it's in the Pri Tzaddik. It's in others between the different, the Pri Tzaddik is according
Because
to
my daughter has
according to the
a
Parshios.
thing on each month which she puts out, and she's always looking for materials.
So it's in between each, when you find the right parsha, it's in between the parshios. It's over there for each month. I'm working on that, also in English. And now I've started actually working on Tefillin, show the Tefillin
Right.
based on the Sfas Emes. And hopefully HaKadosh Baruch will give me koach and strength to be able
Amen.
to get them. And Baruch Hashem, I have a Talmud who I'm not allowed, whatever, who is very helpful in doing all of this. And I have a tremendous hakaras hatov to him. I can't publicly acknowledge my hakaras hatov only in this way, but I do have to say.
Because he wants to remain anonymous?
Yeah.
I'll take credit. I'm the one who's actually funding all these projects.
I'll get the check afterwards.
I'll say, yeah, talk to that guy. He's my representative.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Well, and don't forget, Rabbi Rudman has a weekly parsha and also Yontif Torah thoughts that come out all the time, and look for that if you want to see incisive and helpful Lemaisa Dika Pshatim that help you get a deeper understanding both of the Yonim in the Parsha and for the Yom Tovim. I am a subscriber, so I'm able to tell you that directly. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can make a comment. You can sponsor an episode. Please, we need sponsors. We burned through our sponsors already. You can sponsor a question and answer, which we don't have this week. So works out well because we don't have a sponsor either. And you can sponsor the Parsha in 5 as we begin our new year. You can submit a question, make a comment. And that's it for now. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky.
And I'm Zave Rudman.
And this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode. And we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah, anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.